Good afternoon. My name is Jared. I'm the Student Data Resource Manager at the OPI. And I'm going to jump right into this webinar. It's just about 2:30. I'm going to move at lightning pace, but I'm recording this webinar so that you guys, you all can watch it at any time afterward. We're covering about 6 or 7 user guides in this webinar today because the collection has been expanding. So today we'll be talking about the fall enrollment count, along with absence data, and then the program participation for fall. And then we have the enrollment exceptions topic that I'm going to cover, which talks about Montana Youth Challenge and Job Corps, et cetera. And then we have extracurricular activities, which is another new guide for those specific sets of students. And then along with the enrollment exceptions user guide is the new 19, 20-year-old exceptions for A and B funding. All of that's happening today at your local OPI center. All right, feel free to ask me questions during the webinar. Don't hesitate to interrupt me. I'm just going to keep going. I probably won't see anything that jumps in the chat because my focus won't be there. So just unmute yourself and ask anything you need to.
I think that.
Go ahead. All right, I heard someone, but okay, jumping right in on the OPI AIM website, you'll find our data collection schedule, which has been updated again to include these new fall items. So if you scroll down to the fall enrollment count, you'll see the fall information that's usual, and then the corresponding user guides that go along with that, which I'll cover the fall count, AIM Mayfair's verification, enrollment exceptions, and extracurricular activities. There's 4 user guides tied to the fall count. And then we have the fall program participation. And there's the sort of the collection guide and then the verification guide. And the and then coming up soon is the fall mode of instruction, but we're not going to talk about that today, even though it's included in the fall section. You can see that it has its own start date and date. So that will be coming up in a separate webinar. I know that some schools are anxious to hear about that, but stay tuned for that. That's not going to take place today. So the fall enrollment count is looking at aggregate hours for your students as of the count date, which is October 4th. This should be updated to say that. It's not showing it. This is, okay, I'll get that changed again. The aggregate hours of instruction and then the count date absences. So those students who are gone on the count date, which is October 4th. And if you go to the AIM collection schedule, you'll see that here. That red date is the count date. The start date, 10/5, is the day that you should start entering the data. Don't start entering the data on the 4th. That's the actual count date. So if we're looking at absences for the 4th of October, you won't know those absences until the day after, or until after your attendance has been calculated at the school. So it's just best to do it the day after to make sure all the attendance has been taken and is accurate for your schools. So count date is officially 10/4, but don't enter your data until 10/5 the following day, which is Tuesday. This guide, I updated this to say October 4th, and I don't know why it is, I have to go to the DNN server and upload it again because the link seems to be broken. Anyway, so the fall and spring count enrollment collection, these are used to collect the aggregate hours of instruction and count date absences as of those count dates. And then once your data is entered into your Infinite Campus system, student data will go to AIM, which is the state level. whereupon then it can be imported into Mayfairs. Your data will not go into Mayfairs until it is at the state level. Mayfairs does not pull from local district websites. It only pulls from the state level. So that's why we do a resync after entering your data, or overnight it'll sync to the state level. So if you have a secretary who's doing Mayfairs, they can't do that until the data is actually in the state level of AIM. Okay, we have our table of contents per usual, and then some frequently asked questions which guide districts on which process to use. District addition users, or those districts who record attendance within Infinite Campus, can use option A, which is the automatic calculation tool, the count date attendance tool. So that's under option A, and I'll show you how to do that. If your attendance is stored on a third-party system outside of Infinite Campus, you would need to perform an extraction and then import that attendance data using option B in this user guide. And then districts who only have a handful of students, you can use the direct entry method of entering student aggregate hours using option C. And then if your district is a medium-sized one and you've got about 150 students, you don't want to hand enter them all, then you can do an extraction of your enrollment, your demographics, of your enrollment data, populate them all to be the full-time aggregate hours, and then use the direct entry method under C to modify any students who are not full-time aggregate hours. There's a note here for districts about KF and KH grade levels. What is the difference? Kindergarten half-time program, grade KH, you'll see that in your system if you have it, is only utilized by those districts that do not have an approved full-time kindergarten program. So if you have an approved kindergarten program that's full-time, you would use KF always, even if your kindergartners are half-time. And the reason is because you would indicate that they're half-time under their aggregate hours. So again, the KH grade level is only if you do not have an approved full-time kindergarten program. Your data checklist is here. You want to make sure that you verify the students' enrollments are accurate and up to date and that there are no overlaps. Run those overlap reports we have for you. There are local overlap report, and then there's the state level one. Run them both to make sure that there are no overlaps between districts. If you do find one, contact that district and find out maybe they have the incorrect end date in the enrollment, or most likely what's happening at this time of the year is they have rolled forward all their students from last year and have not removed any of those students who are not coming back, who may have transferred to your district. In that case, they would have two enrollments, one for your district and one in that previous district that they just haven't been removed yet. Contact that district and get that cleaned up between yourselves before you do all of this. And then you want to check your service types to make sure that they're accurate, primary, partial, and special ed service types. Indian language immersion program, we're going to talk about that in a little bit here too, making sure that that box is checked under their enrollment tab. For early graduates, enter diploma dates, diploma types, diploma periods, and verify that their end date is before the count date for early graduates. Excuse me. Then you want to verify the enrollment statuses of your Youth Challenge, Job Corps, and Digital Academy students, and date any of those as necessary. And then for, those Montana Youth Challenge, Job Corps students I mentioned earlier are linked into that Enrollment Exceptions user guide, which I'll go over in a little bit here. Make sure your special education exit dates and exit reasons are entered and that IEPs are locked. And once that's done, you can go proceed with entering your aggregate hours and count date absences for the students. Making sure to exclude that, clicking that exclude fall box for these reasons. if they've missed 11 days prior to the count date, including the count date. If they're a kindergartner not 5 years old as of September 10th that did not receive board approval. And students placed in day treatment as of the count date. You can run ad hocs when you're done to check your data to make sure it's accurate after you've entered it. You can do a resync now, or you can continue on with the rest of these user guides and do what you need to do and then do a resync, however works for you as far as organizing your time. If you don't have any program participants, then go ahead and do a resync. And then you can also use those reports inside of Infinite Campus again to check your enrollments to make sure that they are correct. And here's another note, again, when excluding that fall A and B box should be checked. Student was absent for those 10 days. Kindergartner is not 5 years old as of September 10th, and student is attending day treatment program. So check those notes out. First here is understanding which system you're using. Are you a district edition user where you record attendance inside of Infinite Campus, or are you a Montana edition user who uses a third-party system to record your attendance? Then you would select the option. You don't do all four, you just do one of these. So the automatic calculation of aggregate hours for those districts who record attendance in campus. This tool is located inside of the index. This is the pathway to get there. Montana state reporting, Montana count date attendance, and then you would go from there. So let's take a look at that tool in my scrambled test site here. Montana state reporting, Montana count date attendance. You want to make sure that you're in the right year, current year, and don't have all schools selected. Do one school at a time. And this is the fall count. You'll see that that date should automatically populate for you in there, the fall count date, which is October 4th. If it doesn't, for some reason, which it should, just put that date in there. All three of these boxes should automatically check. Do not uncheck them. It's going to calculate all three of those for you. And then you can do a run test, see if there's any errors or warnings that you need to look at. If there are, fix them, and then come back and do generate. And then it'll tell you how many student enrollments were updated. To check it, if you want to do a quick glance, also you could run the ad hocs, but you can also go and look at your students by just going to student, click go under the search tab, click on the name, click on the enrollment tab, click on the current year enrollment, scroll down to the state reporting fields, where you'll find the enrollment counts section, and we're in the fall enrollment count area. And if the tool was accurate and running correctly, you would see that this would be populated. It would say full-time or whatever the hours of instruction the student has had up to this point. So just again, if this was a kindergartner, going back to that note about kindergarten, half-time, full-time. If you have a full-time kindergarten program that you're approved for, their grade level would not be KH, it would be KF, even though they're half-time. For example, if a student is a half-time kindergartner, if you're approved for a full-time program, you put the full-time program grade level in here. And then down here is where you would indicate their hours being half-time, H for half-time. So that's how you would do that. You would also see, after you calculate that tool, the attendance tool, you would see the fall absent in here. So if attendance was accurately entered into your system, again, for those who record attendance inside of their Infinite Campus system, any students that were gone on October 4th would have a 1 here. Any students gone for half of a day on October 4th would have a 0.5 and a quarter of a day, so on. You can't have more than 1 day of absence here because it's only looking at October 4th. It's not looking at cumulative absences. Here's that exclude fall A and B box. For those 3 reasons, a student may be excluded from A and B, such as a kindergartner who was not board approved and is not 5 years old as of September 10th, students in a day treatment program, or they missed 10 consecutive days, including the count date. And then I'll come back to these two when I do the program stuff, but this is where Job Corps Montana Youth Challenge is indicated. So it's twice a year, it's fall and spring. The students in Job Corps, you would check that box for fall. And then during the spring count, we'll come back here. And if they're still in that program, you would check that box. And then this age 19 or 20 eligible for A and B, I'll cover that here when I go through these other programs as well, as to when that can be checked to include for A and B. So that's the count attendance tool for those districts who record attendance in Infinite Campus. Just real quick, I'll go back here and point out the Indian Language Immersion Program box. Job Corps, Montana Youth Challenge, age 19-20, they all have 2 boxes, one for each count. Indian Language Immersion Program is the only one that has 1 box here. So if they're a participant, click that, click save, so it's in their record. That's where you find that one. Okay, so option B is for Montana Edition users who record their attendance data outside of campus in another party, third-party system. In that case, you would perform an extraction and import the data into Infinite Campus. You would want to use the fall count template. By this time, you should have already done your demographic and your enrollment uploads into Infinite Campus. You can't do the fall count template upload until you've done those 2. And the demographic one is done first. Then you do the enrollment template. And the next one is fall count. You can access this template as it's hyperlinked into the user guide, or you can always go to the AIM website, OPI website here, and go down to the AIM uploads, and you'll find all of the templates necessary here. And the fall count is here. Click on that, open it up. Your third-party system vendor should allow you to extract your attendance data in this exact same format. Look at your extraction, and it should match these columns and these the info in the columns. For example, it should say AF for record type, which is attendance fall. You should have a district number, a school number. If you hover over these arrows, it tells you where to find this information if you do not know. Calendar number, and your students' state IDs, last names, first names, fall absent count. So this is the fall absent field, and their examples here are, for example, half day absent, you would enter 0.500, or a quarter day. A full day absence is 1.000. So let's say this student was gone on the fall count date. Exclude fall, nope, this student is not going to be excluded. Aggregate hours of instruction, it's going to be F full-time. And then you can also indicate whether the student is a participant in their Job Corps program with a Y, eligible for 1920. Here it tells you when to check that box if it's applicable. I'll go over that again in a bit. And then the Indian Language Immersion Program. So as you can see, these fields here correspond to what is inside of the state reporting area here. Those fields correspond to what's right here. And then you enter the last year of the school year. So it'll be 2022. So now your template, your extraction should match this. It should look something like this in a TXT file. If it doesn't, then you can use this template to make sure the data is in the correct format, in the right rows, etc. So then you don't have to use the template if your extraction matches the template perfectly. If it doesn't, then use the template to correct it. Delete these first 3 rows when you've got all of your data entered. Come on, what's going on here? Delete. And then you can save this as a tab delimited file to your desktop or wherever you can find it quickly. It's going to save it to the desktop here. I can close this because I don't need it anymore. And here is what it looks like. So your extraction should look something like that. Only thing you need to add is that header row. So go in front of your AF, hit enter, arrow up, and enter the header row that belongs up there. So HD tab, just one tab, and then the date of your extraction. So today's date, most likely you'll be doing October 5th or something like that. Time and military time, just put 10 a.m., it's easiest. And then MT 9.1, and then click save. And now your file is ready to be imported, and you would have rows and rows and rows and rows of data here. Then you would come in here to the index, go to Montana State Reporting, Montana Data Upload, and scroll down to the import data type here, and you're going to do the fall enrollment count. First, you're going to validate and test the file. So you're going to choose the file that I just created here, and I'm going to click submit to batch. It's going to pop down here in this little screen. I always check these, keep them checked, because that way the record is there for you to look at if you need to in the future. Click OK, and you can see it says queued. Now, if it stays queued for a while, give it 5 or 10 minutes, then click refresh, and then it'll say when it's complete here, and it'll say get the report. Click on that, look at any warnings or errors that might be needed to correct them, and then re-upload it. And then instead of validate and test, you're going to upload file. That will change the data. Validating and testing does not change data, it just tests it. Come back here and upload it to actually change and enter those aggregate hours, absence info. So that's the Montana Edition users process. So any district who wishes to do it manually, you can do that by entering this. Just go to your current school year and then click on the school you want to look at. Click on students and just click go. Select your students one by one if this is how you wish to do it. Go to their enrollment tab, click on the current year enrollment, scroll down to the state state reporting fields, and enter the student's aggregate hours, enter any absence data, check any of these boxes that apply, and click save. That's the manual method. The fourth method, which I will not demonstrate because it's not very often used, is any district, essentially, you can perform an extraction of your student data and then populate the enrollment template, the same one the Montana Edition users use, to set all of the statuses or the set all of the aggregate hours to be, all full-time, and then go back in and then just manually change any of those. Like, let's say this Emma, she's half-time or something. You go in and change her record to be half-time. So that's another way of doing it. And then just says here to adjust the individual student record, which is a repeat of what's here, of what I've already shown you, manually changing those records. And then once you got your aggregate hours entered, you can go to the state published folder under ad hoc reporting, and you'll be able to see the state published list, and then you'll see the fall aggregate hours missing or not full-time. If you want to look at how many students are in there that are not full-time, just to make sure that that number is correct, you can do that. And then here, those enrollment overlap reports that I mentioned earlier, you can look at those enrollment summary report details to make sure that all of that information looks correct. Okay, so just note that if a student was not properly scheduled, it may cause aggregate hours to calculate incorrectly. You can correct this by changing the value directly in the field. So let's say there's something wonky in their schedule, they're still considered full-time. Maybe it's an IEP, for example. IEPs are amended to where sometimes the student is taking 4 classes, but that is approved to count as full-time for them. So what you would do is run your calculation, and it would probably say half-time. aggregate hours in their enrollment tab, and then you would need to go and change it to be accurate full-time, because the tool is not sophisticated enough to read an IEP to know when a student has a schedule that is supposed to be, or that is qualifies as full-time, but really it's written as half-time. It's only going to see what's written data-wise. So be mindful of that. And then you can perform the resync if you're done. And then there's instructions for importing into Mayfairs, which again can be done until you do a resync. It cannot be done. So the AIM Mayfairs verification guide, this is helpful. It gives you a lot of definitions as to what it is that's happening with AIM and Mayfairs. What are these data types that are going to Mayfairs? So these elements inside of Infinite Campus, not all of them go to Mayfairs. Some of them do. And so this gives you a chart of what's happening between AIM and Mayfairs. Really handy there. This gives you information about basic enrollments, how to enroll in a student, service types, when to use the primary, partial, or end service type, and special ed service types. And let's see, this gives you further definitions for service types. By now, you probably know what those mean, but for example, you cannot have two primary service types. If you have a student that has two enrollments, one at your school and one at another school, they cannot both be primary. One has to be primary and one is partial. So work amongst yourselves to figure out who has the most hours, in that kind of situation. Okay, and again, here are some information about aggregate hours. It gives you a little bit more information than the fall count guide does, just by definitions to help you out there if you're newer. And it gives you an example of how to calculate. Let's say you're manually entering your aggregate hours. This gives you a nice example of how to do the calculation. Absent on the count date, what this means, and I explained that, those decimal points, and that you can only have one full day there. That's the maximum. When to exclude from fall A and B. And then here we are, this is new for the age 19 and 20 eligible for A and B, that box I was showing you under the fall count. So students who are age 19 or older as of September 10th of the current school year are automatically excluded from A and B calculation. However, some students who are not yet 21, so between 19 and 20, as of September 10th, may now be eligible for A and B, provided they meet all three of these criteria. They have to meet all three of these. So not just the age, that's just the first thing. The student also has not graduated. The student is eligible for special education services and is likely to be eligible for adult services for individuals with developmental disabilities due to the significance of the student's disability. And the student's individualized education program has identified transitional goals that focus on preparation for living and working in the community following high school graduation since age 16, or the student's disability has increased in significance after age 16. So be mindful of those caveats before checking that box. And then early graduates, this is for the spring count only. So we're gonna skip over that because that's not for a while. And then data verification. Again, you can run those reports, enrollment summary details report. If you don't know where that is, it's under your index inside campus, under student information, under reports. And there's a whole slew of reports so you can run your enrollment status, summary detail, and then below that, even further down, is that state enrollment overlap report that we want you to run. And that's what I was just mentioning here. Those reports are customizable, so you can look at specific grades or just only certain start statuses at certain schools, etc. And now race verification for fall count. That's this count that we're doing. So all Mayfair's collections import race data, but the fall Mayfair's collection is used to generate the district's American Indian Student Achievement Gap payment. So it's important to verify that the district's American Indian student population before importing the enrollments into Mayfair. So before you do anything with Mayfairs, after you've entered your aggregate hours, double check that your American Indian student population is accurate. Their information is accurate, as they will not accept changes to those student counts after December 31st. So you can also run this ad hoc under the state published folder to look at that population of students. Fall enrollment, American Indian student count. And that's all the ad hocs that I'm mentioning are in the index under ad hoc reporting, filter designer, and you would see a state published folder in here. It's not in the test type. And then if you've made any changes again, do a resync before you import into Mayfairs. So I'm going to close these up just because it's a lot of information here. I'm going to whittle on down now. It's 3 o'clock. We have another half an hour still. I'm happy to hang out longer too if there's any questions afterward. Don't mind that at all either. So this user guide was before separated into Job Corps and the Montana Youth Challenge, different user guides. And then we combined them once the ages 19, 20, eligible for A and B happened, to be one general user guide called Enrollment Exceptions, because these are exceptions essentially. So this guide will give you guidance on process for enrolling students who are in Job Corps, Montana Youth Challenge, taking Montana Digital Academy courses, and those select 19, 20-year-old students that I just talked about for including in A and B. See, again, there's a note. The reason why we're talking about this is because the fall count information is used for calculating A and B, and this information is part of calculating the A and B funding. Here are frequently asked questions, and it goes by pages here, so you can jump to pages 4 or 7. I received notice that the Montana Youth Challenge or Job Corps, that one of our students will be attending next session. May I count the student for A and B? Yes. You can enroll them, and then those 2 boxes underneath the enrollment tab I mentioned under the fall count for Job Corps on Montana Youth Challenge can then be checked if that student is a participant right in there. How are Montana Youth Challenge Job Corps students enrolled in AIM? The same way other students are, but look at pages 4 and 7 to get specific enrollment information there. What happens when the Montana Youth Challenge student wants to take in the high set? There's guidance in here for that too on page 5. District will end the student's enrollment in AIM as of the request date, using a non-dropout status. The student transfers to the MYC facility as of the request date. What happens when the Job Corps students wants to take the high set? The district will end the student's enrollment and as of the request date, and then use a dropout end status. See page 8 for that. What happens when the MYC student drops out of the program? If a student was enrolled for A and B funding and does not return to school immediately, they are considered a dropout. See page 5. How do I indicate their participation in these programs for A and B funding? I just mentioned that under the state reporting fields. How are Montana Digital Academy students enrolled in the AIM? Regularly enrolled students taking supplemental MTDA courses require no special enrollment. Homeschool or private school students should be enrolled with an S partial enrollment because their full-time enrollment would be at homeschool, for example, or the private school. And again, you can't have 2 primary enrollments. You have to have one school has 1 primary, the other school has a partial. See page 9. Are students taking MTDA courses eligible to be included in district's A and B count? If a student is a resident of the district or attending under mandatory attendance agreement, the student may be included for the A and B count. How many hours of instruction is each MTDA course worth? Hours are calculated for each course are the same for any equivalent course offered at the district. Are students older than 19 included in the district's A and B count? See page 11 for those specific caveats as to how that works. Contents, and then here it jumps into Montana Youth Challenge program guidelines. Students participating in MYC, they have to meet all of these criteria, must be enrolled in a public school in the district of residence, The credits taken require approval by the resident school district. Credits must meet this district's requirements for graduation. And the credits must be taught by an instructor who has a current certification, and credits must be reported by the NYC to the student's resident school district. And then creating an enrollment for Montana Youth Challenge. It's similar for enrolling any other kiddo. They would have a service type of P primary. And then here is talking about those inclusion for A and B, where to check those boxes for aggregate hours, set the aggregate hours to full-time, exiting the students when they leave, for example, but keeping the enrollment. When an MIC student requests to sit for the high set, you would use that local end status of 175, the non-dropout code of 175 transferred to a Montana Youth Challenge. If the student completes the MYC program without sitting for the high set and returns to the school, the district should continue the student's enrollment. If the student drops out of the program without sitting for the high set and does not immediately return, the district should enter a dropout end reason, end status, and the end date. So exiting those students for not, and then not keeping the enrollment. So all these different scenarios played out here for you. Tells you which end status to use, and then non-dropout code of 175 again. And then for students starting at NYC in the winter session, how to enroll them into AIM. And then enrolling students returning to school from NYC. Local start status should be transferred from Montana Youth Challenge Code 20. Same thing for Montana Job Corps program guidelines. Similar requirements. I'm not going to read those to save time. Again, they all have the service type of primary. You've seen where to include them under the enrollment tab, under the state reporting fields for fall A and B, and then you set their aggregate hours to full-time, 720 hours. Exiting those job course students shows you the end date, and then the dropout reason codes here and the local end status. If the student does not continue enrollment in the public school, the student must be coded as a dropout, and then select dropout reason 18, high set pursuing, if the student requests to sit for the high set. So all kinds of caveats there to be mindful of. And then here we have Montana Digital Academy enrollments. When a student takes MTDA courses to complement their district enrollment, no modification to the enrollment is necessary. The start date for the students taking a combination of district digital academy classes is the first day of attendance in the district. The start date for students only taking MTDA classes is the first day of the MTDA semester, or the first day the student participates in the MTDA course, whichever is latter. This tells you how to enroll a student for MTDA. If a student enrolls at the district from a homeschool or private school, or if a school is not working toward graduation from the student is not working toward graduation from the district and takes courses from MTDA through the public school, enter a service type partial, as partial, and a local start status that reflects their current enrollment, i.e., for example, transfer from homeschool within the state, transfer code 09. Aggregate hours for MTDA students, Digital Academy students, tells you how to calculate that. If the student is enrolled in regular district courses, in addition, add the courses to the student's regular schedule. So for example, if they take 6 regular district courses plus 1 MTDA course, they have a total of 7 regular district courses for A and B funding. If the student is only enrolled in MTDA courses, calculate the aggregate hours as if the student were enrolled in an equivalent course through the district. So it tells you how to do that calculation and where to set that under the enrollment state reporting fields. And then how to exit the MTDA students. For example, if the transferred in from a homeschool, then the local end status may be 170 transferred back to the homeschool. And here we have that information again repeated for those age 19, 20-year-olds eligible for A and B and when to check that box. And then another bit of information again on the Indian language immersion program. And again, that one box that falls underneath the fall count, which is this count, which is where that's indicated. And it's important to note that those program students have a service type P primary. Excuse me. All right, that is the enrollment exceptions user guide. Let's get out of that one. Before I go on to the extracurricular activities, I'm just going to go through those program participation guides because these haven't really changed much with the exception of gifted and talented. So if you are familiar with these, there isn't a whole lot different here. Except for, again, gifted and talented has changed. So program participation collection guide, you can see all three collections in which this data is looked at. And what this means is at these 3 mile markers through the year, this data needs to be accurate as of these 3 times of the year. So you should update this data throughout the year. I think whenever there's a change, a student enters a program or leaves a program, don't wait until these milestones to change the data. I think for me, anyway, that would be really difficult to manage because I might forget something. Change the data, alter it when it happens, and then check it for accuracy at these 3 points to make sure that the data is up to date. Okay, so table of contents, frequently asked questions. There is a program participation template that Montana Edition users can use to import their program data. It looks like this. And then all the other districts who maintain their other program attendance data would just do it manually. So most of the program data lives within the enrollment tab. Under the state reporting fields is where you find all this enrollment, these little check boxes. So for example, immigrant students, 21st century participant, homeless, unaccompanied youth, example, section 504. Now here's where the change came for gifted and talented. We used to just have the one gifted and talented box, now there's 2. There's the difference between evaluated and identified. If a student is gifted and talented identified, it'll tell you that the evaluated box must also be checked. You can't have an identified kid unless they've been evaluated first. You can, however, have a kid that's been evaluated but not yet identified. So that's the biggest change there. That change is also reflected in the program participation template for those Montana Edition users that are uploading their data. You'll see here there's an additional column, and it tells you that if you're indicating Y for identified, then the gifted talented evaluated box must also have a Y in it. So there is a change there to be mindful of. We have our data checklist, making sure enrollments are accurate, up to date, and then you would go on to make sure that you see it says here, enter, verify. You can enter this data, I guess whenever it works for you, but again, I would recommend doing it when the data, for example, if you're a Montana Edition user, you've got your third-party system, make sure it's up to date, and then import the data into Infinite Campus as of these, the day after the count date. And if you're a District Edition user using the campus to record your attendance data, just update it throughout the year as things happen, and then just verify that it's accurate. So that's why it says enter, verify. And then you can use those ad hoc reports to verify the data. So if you've got your information, you're pretty sure it's up to date, you can jump ahead to those ad hocs, start running those program participant ad hocs, and check them out. Make sure that they're up to date and accurate. Okay, this tells you again a repeat of where to find the state reporting fields to indicate these program participants. The only programs that are not located inside of this area of the enrollment tab are those much larger programs such as FRAM, EL students that you see here. They have their own separate module because the data entry is larger than just a checkbox. It's a little more complicated than that. So you go to index, program participation under student information, you'll see the English learners module. And it'll bring you up and it'll tell you that the home primary language and the language impact must both be entered before the student can have an EL record created. And to do that, we go to index for the student, census, people, and you would see here the home primary language and language of impact. You cannot have just this one or just this one indicated. They must both be populated. You can't just have one or the other. So there is the EL user guide for that process. It's pretty straightforward. It's under AIM user guides. All these guides by collection schedule, and under the Fall Enrollment Count program participation, you'll see the EL's learners user guide here. FRAM is similar in that it has its own user guide, and there's a file upload that can be done for those students, or there's a direct entry method that can be done. And let me get back to campus, and that is located further down under its own module. Do FRAM under eligibility, and let's say you want to create a new record, school year, start date, end date, eligibility type, eligibility, free, reduced, paid. Source is either non-direct or direct. Just know that either one will give you a different menu of options. So if you click direct, certified type, you click one of those. Non-direct, drop it down, there's a different list of certification types. Click save, and that student has a record. Okay, then the program verification guide just breaks down further information for you regarding these programs, further detailed definitions, for example. You can run reports based on start status or end statuses to look at those specific students. This is information regarding the Job Corps Montana Youth Challenge students. And we have information about Title I Targeted Assistant Program here, Part A neglected, delinquent, how to indicate those students under that enrollment section, under the enrollment field. All those programs that reside down here in state reporting fields, which boxes go with what program, for example. And then here's information again about gifted and talented, evaluated and identified, the differences between the two. And then this is a reminder about those programs that live outside of the enrollment tab. So there's EL and then the FRAM. And there's also special education too. Okay, that brings us to the extracurricular activities user guide. Now, this is the last section of this webinar. And this is a new piece of data collection. It was added recently. So Senate Bill 72 allows non-public students who participate in extracurricular activities to be included as partially enrolled for A and B calculations. Senate Bill 157 allows for private and homeschool students to participate in extracurricular activities offered by the student's resident district when meeting certain requirements. So just so you know, this is not required data. This is voluntary data that the district can decide whether they wish to do or not. The decision to add these students is entirely a district decision. If you decide to, you can use this user guide to do that. Extracurricular activity is defined as a sport of activity sanctioned by an organization having jurisdiction over the interscholastic activities, contest and or tournaments, for example, high school basketball, speech and debate, science Olympiad. It can also be an approved career technical student organization, for example, Future Farmers of America, or it could be a school theatrical production. Participation requirements. Students eligible for extracurricular activities for inclusion for A and B must meet these requirements. They have to have a primary enrollment in a non-public school or a homeschool, in which case they would have a partial enrollment for participation in this. They could not have a primary enrollment for this. The student must reside in the school district where the extracurricular activity is being offered, and they must maintain the same eligibility as required for participation in the activity as any other public school student would. Table of contents, frequently asked questions. Which extracurricular activities qualify? All K through 12 EC activities sponsored by the school that are available to public school students outside of normal courses are eligible for non-public students' participation, provided that they meet those requirements above. Which students qualify for inclusion? Again, to repeat what was above, they must be primarily enrolled in a non-public or homeschool. It may be a very odd situation where the student might have a partial enrollment in the public school. You can call us to get help with that situation if it comes up. But they also must comply with the same rules that govern that activity and maintain the same academic eligibility as required for any other public school student. Who verifies eligibility requirements for the students? The school's principal verifies eligibility requirements. At the OPI, we don't do that. The principal will need to do that. What happens if the student does not complete the extracurricular activity? So schools must use the same standard when determining whether a full-time enrolled student, part-time enrolled student, or non-enrolled student completed an extracurricular activity. The student cannot be given partial credit for completing more than 6 weeks, but less than the full duration of the activity. So if the program is 6 weeks long, they can't get full credit if they only complete part of it. A student must meet and maintain the same eligibility standards. But if a suspension prevented the student from completing the full session of the activity, it's within the district's discretion to determine whether to count the extracurricular activity as completed or not, so long as the student met the minimum weekly requirement. So there's some examples before here. For example, a student might be injured while playing basketball and is unable to play. However, the student continues to attend practice, they sit and watch at the games, they do mandatory meetings, then the student can be considered as having completed the activity if you desire to have them that way. Let's say the student becomes ill and is unable to continue the activity practice and withdraws. The student would be considered as not having completed the activity then. Student is participating in a 19-week-long activity and then stops at 12 weeks. They don't finish it. Then the student would not be considered having completed that activity. How do we calculate the student's participation? For completed eligible EC activities lasting 6 weeks, but less than 18 weeks long, you would indicate here in Campus, I'll show you these fields. So there's 2 fields. There's a 6-week-long program field and an 18-week-long program field. You would indicate how many programs or activities they completed. So let's say the student completed 1 18-week program and 2 6-week programs. In those fields, which I'll show you in a minute, you fill in 2 under the 6 weeks, and you would put 1 under the 18 weeks one. That's how you would calculate those. So the first thing you need to do before you do any entering of these students and enrolling them is you need to create a separate calendar specifically for extracurricular activities. Now in my test site, I have a couple high schools and a couple elementary schools and a couple middle schools. You would only create an extracurricular activity calendar for each grouping of those grade levels. So you would need one separate calendar for all of your high schools. You could title it Extracurriculars High School. You would need one calendar for your middle schools, Extracurricular Middle Schools. And you would need one separate calendar for your primary ones, Extracurricular Primary, for example. So if you got 15 schools, you only need 3 additional calendars. You don't need an additional calendar for each school. And the reason that is because the data is simple and it's done by grade level. So you would need to organize them accordingly. So the calendars are by grade level, essentially. So that's what this is talking about here. You do not put extracurricular enrollments for these students inside of your academic calendars. So these are your academic calendars. This is where all of your public school student data lives. All of your regular enrollments live in these calendars. You don't want to create a non-public students extracurricular enrollment in these calendars. This is just for your academic stuff, right? Not for those extracurricular activity non-public school students. So then you would create the calendars first, then you would enroll them into those brand new calendars. So this step is step-by-step process to creating those calendars, much like you would create your beginning of the year calendars. So if I go in here to index system administration, so many things open here. Go to calendar wizard. Create new calendars by rolling forward select data. It's going to give you the year. That's great. School name, just leave that as it is. Enter number 2. Normally you would enter number 1, but this is a different type of calendar. It's not your academic calendar. So enter a 2. Start date will be the same fiscal year dates. July 1st always of whatever year, and then June 30th of the end of the year. And then just pick any of these calendars from last year you want to roll forward. Doesn't matter because you're going to rename it. So let's just say it's this one here. Click next, just pick one of them. But just make sure that it's the corresponding high school. You know, if it's a high school calendar you're creating, then pick one of the previous high schools. You don't have to pick all of the high schools, just one of them. If you're creating a middle school extracurricular calendar, pick one of the middle schools. The reason is because your grade levels are already established in those calendars and you just want to copy them forward. Now, normally when you do this copy forward process, you check all these boxes. Since these calendars are limited, we don't need all this data in here. We just are going to select these first 5 boxes. And that is all in this user guide. I'm just skipping ahead here. It tells you which boxes to check. And then you're going to select Run Wizard. It says complete. I'm going to refresh my browser. And now most likely I'm going to have a duplicate calendar in here. So what I want to do is right in there, I've got a duplicate. I'm going to go to calendar and rename that puppy to be the extracurriculars calendar for the high schools. Sorry, just trying to close some of these things up so I can find where I'm going. And calendar. All right, let's unmark that for deletion. So let's just put in here, for example, 21, 22, extra, oops, where'd I go? You can put extra C only high school. If you want. And if it was a middle school, you do the same thing, but just put middle school. Click save. And now make sure your grade levels are right. Good, those copy forward. This, all right. This is weird. This is not right, but this is a test site. So I don't know why that's like that. Okay, let's just clean these up. They're mapped right, but they don't have the right sequence number. So that's why we check them. In the user guides, it always says, once you create your calendars, you verify that it's accurate. And that's exactly what I just did. I went in there and I found that the grade levels were not sequenced correctly. So that's what it talks about here. Sequence numbers, grade levels, etc. Schedule structure. Oops. It should be main or 1. Either one's fine. Terms. Here you just need full quarter, like, so let's say you have semesters, quarters, whatever. You don't need to have quarters. You can put quarters in here. If it copied it forward from last year, that's fine. You can use that. But for the purposes of reporting these extracurricular students, you only have to have a full year one in here. So just click on full year. If it doesn't have one, click new, and then enter your first day of instruction and your last day of instruction. So calendar tab always has fiscal year dates, the full year. Terms tab is where your days of instruction go. First day of school, last day of school. Click save. Right. Now you can see I have a calendar created specifically for extracurricular activities for those non-public school students. That's for high school students. So if they qualify, they would be in high school. That's where they would go. And then I would continue with that calendar creation process and do one for the middle schools and then one for the primary schools. Once that's done, then you would actually continue with the enrollment process. So you would use your student locator like you would for any other student. Enroll that student. Let's go to the student locator here. Do a search. This student is, let's say it's a homeschool student and does not have a public record or state ID. We're going to create a new ID. And you're going to fill out what's in red. So fill out their birth date, the race, ethnicity info, and come down here to the enrollment section. You're going to put them in that calendar for extracurriculars only, be it a high school or middle school, whatever it is. Get their grade in there. Schedule would be 1, their first day of participation in that activity, and the service type has to be partial. And then the transfer code of transfer from homeschool, private school, etc. And then come down here, and this is where you're going to check that this is extracurricular activities only. I'm going to put today's date in there just for a start date. Save, it may not do it. Oh, let's see, it's test site, so it never is sure. Oh, great, it enrolled them. Now I have an enrollment with an S partial type, has to be S partial type, can't be primary. Start date of that activity, it's in that calendar. Now I have that extracurricular activities boxes checked. The only other thing to do with these kiddos is at the end of the year. Unless the student, leaves the program or the activity, you would, put an end date in there. But here's those completed extracurricular activities boxes for non-public school students. It's again under the rest of those state reporting fields, underneath the spring, fall, and underneath the end of year section, because that's where you're going to do this. You're going to calculate how many number of 6-week activities did the student complete. Let's say the student was really ambitious and did 10. It's possible. And number of 18-week activities, let's say they did none. So it'd be 0. Let's say they did 3 6-week programs and 2 18-week programs. That's how you would enter that at the end of the year. So you want to get these kiddos set up now, get these calendars created now at the beginning of the year. As they come into your school for participation, you can enroll them in these separate calendars. And then at the end of the year, access this same user guide and then complete the those calculations for those numbers there. And then do a resync. Excuse me. That takes us to literally 2 minutes beyond the hour. Are there any questions that I could answer? I see there's something in the chat. Nicole says, if a district feels they have a situation that warrants an exception to A and B, that has to be requested prior to the count date. Yeah. Okay. Any questions real quickly? I can hang out here for a minute or two. I know that this was a lot of information and it's recorded and you will be able to find it on the AIM webinars page. If I can get back here. Tomorrow I'll have this, there's no technical issues. I should have this posted here in my list of webinars. Just so you know, under the beginning of year verification webinar, I did talk about these enrollment exceptions and extracurricular activities there as well. But since it's new and some of this stuff is impacting A and B, I made sure to talk about it today. So you'll find that here in the top of the list. All right, well, if there's no questions, I'm going to jump off and have some water. Enjoy your evening and we'll see you next time, I hope.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.